it is hurting ourselves. It is hurting everybody. One example, and going back to social media, is that we're alienated from our own emotions. This is just one example, right? Because when we know that on social media, if you are really a downer, if you're like talking about all these things and people don't click on that or don't appreciate that, then we shape ourselves or the selfie self, right? According to what we think the audience might want to respond or respond positively, right? And this is dangerous because then we can't even access that. What are we really feeling right now, right?
Welcome to Friends Between Worlds, a podcast for people who want to understand why the modern world feels so on edge and what we can do about it. This podcast helps you feel less alone and gain cutting-edge perspectives from some fascinating thinkers of our time. We offer companionship and insight. This is Friends Between Worlds. Please join us. Hello, friends. In this first episode of the podcast, I am so delighted to bring you the voice of Dr. Ayu Saraswati. Dr. Saraswati is a professor in the Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. She is an award-winning author of 3 books. The first, Seeing Beauty, Sensing Race in Transnational Indonesia. A second book, the one that drew me to her work, is Pain Generation, Social Media, Feminist Activism, and the Neoliberal Selfie. And most recently, she wrote Scarred, a feminist journey through pain, which I like to say is like Eat, Pray, Love with an intellectual twist. I became interested in Ayu's work in her book Pain Generation, where she described the connection between selfie culture and neoliberalism. And Ayu wrote in the book, "The neoliberal selfie gaze is a mode of seeing and storifying the self on social media as a good neoliberal subject who is appealing, inspiring, and entertaining. It is thus a propped up prosthetic extension and performance of the self." Today on the podcast, we'll have a conversation in which we talk about the way social media can lead to alienation from our own direct experience. And we cover a number of other really interesting topics, including emotional contracts, defiant perception, and feminist enchantment. I really enjoyed this conversation. Meeting Ayu was like meeting an old friend for the first time. This conversation has also made me think a lot about not just selfie culture on social media, but what Ayu talks about as arrogant perception, where we point our finger at the individual. We criticize and cancel each other. We look for heroes and villains, rather than examining the ideologies and the structures that enable the pain we might be feeling. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy. I am so delighted and grateful to have here today Dr. Ayu Saraswati. You are so welcome here, Ayu. Thank you. I want to start by inviting you to introduce yourself by describing a relationship that has shaped you and what you are exploring today.
First of all, obviously, I want to say thank you. Thank you for this beautiful invitation. I just want to say it is such an honor to be invited to this kind of conversations, which I am certain it's going to be a learning experience for me as well. So having said that, your first question about describing a relationship that shaped who I am, and I was thinking about this in terms of person in the beginning, right? And I thought, what would that look like? And then I thought, let me just kind of like twist this question a little bit, and you probably know where I'm going to go with this, is to focus on a culture. I would like to say that my relationship with Javanese culture, it's Javanese, which is an island in Indonesia. This is the culture that my mom and my dad sort of like grew up in themselves, and at home they speak Javanese to each other. So this is like the culture that I grew up with, even though we all also speak, Indonesian language, which is the national language. So Javanese culture is very patriarchal, right? This is where my father and my mother too, in some ways, would not allow me to go outside after 8 p.m. You have to go home, right? Versus my brother, my younger brother, he could like sleep over, he could do whatever he wants, right? Also, he could eat whatever he wants, because for boys, he could get as big as he wanted to, and it's fine because they're boys. And for girls, obviously, you can't. There's the beauty standard, and that's kind of like the big thing in our culture, that you should not get fat, right? So that idea. And so these are troubling. And I had always been kind of like a rebellious kid throughout my life. I was out there climbing trees, like all of that kind of stuff, right? But then, so I knew already, like, this is not fair, right? But then it wasn't until I went to college and took sociology 101, and then learned, oh, there's this thing called gender. And that's what got me into finally getting my PhD in women's studies, right? And so if anything, that would be the most profound, I would say, relation um, that really shaped like who I am, and the kind of works that I do, the books that I wrote. It's all about sort of looking at these kind of like inequalities. My first book, for example, is about beauty, right? And again, beauty standards for men and women and all different genders are so different. And so that's why I want to kind of look at all of these inequalities that have a lot to do with gender. So there's my relationship.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm fascinated to learn, where was the bridge into learning, teaching about what neoliberalism is? I'm going to ask you too to like talk about what that is, how you think about what that term means, but where did that come online for you?
And so neoliberalism, just a very, very sort of like basic understanding of the transfer of, in some ways they say power, but also responsibilities from the state or from the government, right, to the person, or this notion of personal responsibility. And so here's what I need to say now. I'm not saying that it is not your personal responsibility. Okay, I'm not saying, oh, okay, oh, the system, if the system
Yeah.
sucks, then I will always like be like this, a victim or anything like that. No, I am saying that we need to see the person within that culture, right? That's why your brilliant first question about the relationship is, I was going to say, maybe my father, as I talked about in my third book, about pain. But then I was thinking, no, no, no. Because even in that book, I also then
Yes.
put my father within his Javanese culture. So
Yeah.
he's acting like that, not because he's just this mean person and all of that. He's operating within that culture that expects him, teaches him to be like that. And so
Yes.
in terms of neoliberalism on social media, one of the funniest thing that I have to say is when I was talking to my colleague about, oh, are you on Facebook, all of that, and he said no, because whenever I log on, it's like everybody becomes like Dalai Lama. And so I was like that too. I was one of those people who would say things like "stay positive" or whatever it is, right? And having this sort of like outlook about, we can do this, we're badass, we're kick ass. And then as I was studying about social media, right, and trying to understand what is the ideology? What is the political economy? Like, what is going on underneath this? Why do almost everybody sound like Dalai Lama? Why are we doing this? Not
Yeah.
only influencers, which are obviously very neoliberal in their sort of like, it is our responsibility, nobody else's. Everything that's happening in your life that is wrong or that is good, it is on you, not on the system, not on anything else, right? And so when I did that research and I began to see, wow, social media operates under this sort of like operating political economy ideology that is called neoliberalism, for what it allows, not just the posting per se, not what just like the content, what people say, but also what they're allowed to do. Because on my feed, not only that people become this positive Dalai Lama, but everybody's selling everything, including myself, even if doing this self promotional, hey, look at my book, it's not that everybody wants to be like that, right? But we also learn and observe when we post in that neoliberal tone of, I just got a divorce, but look at me, I'm gonna be the best version of myself because of this. Those are the kind of posting that get hundred thousands whatever likes, the kinds that go viral, right? And viral or going viral is the currency in social media, right? And so it is that second book that opened my eyes to the fact that I too was part of the problem. One of those things that after you see something, you can't unsee that. I kid you not, in my syllabus before, I even said I value personal responsibility, right?
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
this is like, I'm totally into like neoliberalism. And so now I have to also look at my posting and, okay, and do what I also talk about in my book.
I so appreciate you saying that. I relate. Like in what I've been writing, I'm saying, "Hey, I'm part of this." When you said like I was doing all this neoliberal stuff, I'm like, "Yeah, me too." And I think it's so powerful to start to talk about it so people can see it, I talk about like it's like the water in which we're swimming. And we don't know. And so when we can see it more clearly, there could be other options. You talked about neoliberalism. There's this the responsibility is put on the individual. Systemic or structural problems are individualized. Why do we want to see what neoliberalism is? What is the what's problematic? Like, why should we even care?
Yeah, one of the first things is that because it is hurting ourselves, it is hurting everybody. One example, and going back to social media, is that we're alienated from our own emotions. This is just one example, right? Because when we know that on social media, if you are really a downer, if you're like talking about all these things that people don't um, click on that or don't appreciate that, then we shape ourselves or the selfie self, right? According to what we think the audience might want to respond or respond positively, right? And this is dangerous because then we can't even access that. What are we really feeling right now? Right? Again, I also did this in the past is that when something happened, somebody did this, whatever, I would post it. People would tweet it or people would post it on Facebook or whatever. Somebody did this to me. So I processed that right away with other people. And so there is this sort of like feeling of like feeling with others, which is great, right? Because that's kind of like what I want to get at, which is, the ability to feel with other. But at the same time, then they're telling us how to feel. And so they're influencing how we want to relate with this another being that maybe we just met on a date right now, but that person is treating us this way and that way and all of these sort of inputs. And we're processing it at the expense of what do I want? Right? Maybe that's the kind of person that I like, but everybody else says no. Being alienated from your own emotion, how can we just really feel what we feel? If divorce sucks, how can we really sit with that emotion and really honor that? Right. And also, I think, what neoliberalism does is that then you blame everything on yourself. You disconnect that connections with others. And this is why I love the title of your podcast, Friends Between Worlds. How can we create that relationships rather than disconnect? Because the thing with neoliberalism, as you mentioned as well, is that it focuses on the individualism, right? When everything is wrong in your life, again, just going back to the example of, or like beauty, right? They look at you and say, hey, they do have beauty tutorial on YouTube. Why, it's your fault if you're still ugly because you don't follow all these things that can turn you from this person to that person. Or with all of these things, even on my Instagram, feeds or anything like that, it's like ads and ads and ads of like whatever that you need to do. Well, it's your fault if you can't speak 10 languages, because with this AI app, you can speak literally a new language in 3 months, right? Rather than, focusing on the collective. How is everybody doing? It's solely focused on what's on your mind, what's, like it's about you. And you talk about this in your book as well, right? Is the me generation, the neoliberalism, and how it really disconnects us, again, not only from our own feelings, but also that sort of collective sort of like feelings and that connection with others, right? And so this is why neoliberalism is problematic, when it hurts actually everybody, not just this one person. It's everybody, the community, the collective, the system, right? So I think that's the most important thing, is to look at how we post as a shortcut in terms of practical suggestions that I have. Every time we post, we want to think about three things. And this is only if you want to try to dissociate or to challenge neoliberalism, right? If you want to go for it, if you want to be the warriors of neoliberalism, hey, you do you, you be great out there, that's okay, right? But if you want to challenge neoliberalism because it's hurting all of us, there are three things: content, context, and the collective. Right. So in terms of the content, so whenever I post something, the content, is it only talking about me, how great my book is, or is it actually talking about something other than just me, right? So if it's a book, for instance, how can this book, help others? I challenge the listeners or the viewers to look at their social media posting for the past 1 week or 1 month, and how many of those are just about yourself, your parties, your travel, your kids, your versus like the community. Hey, my neighbor did this for me. This, the content. What is it that you're actually posting? The content and the context, right? I'm able to travel this time because so and so paid for me to give a talk there, or this, or I get grants to like do research here, or something, right? Like, what is the context, and why are you posting this? Like, what the I in the context? Like, what does it mean to be in the context? And then the collective. The collective means, is this posting actually going to benefit us as a community, as a collective? And the community can be our own neighbor, our friends, whatever, right? But is it only going to benefit me, make me look great, fabulous? Or is it also going to benefit the collective? Is it going to end in some ways systemic oppression? Okay. So again, just to be clear, I don't expect anybody, not even myself, to have to always pose this way. If you want to pose your cat pictures once in a while, your baby pictures, and I do actually adore them, I really do, so thank you for sharing that. Go ahead and do that. But if it's all that you do, all that you are, then you want to own that, you are part of the problem. How can we, if we do want to have a better relationship, a better world, better everything and anything, then, how can we move toward that?
So content, context, and collective. I feel like you just gave me a primer on how I can actually post things because I feel such a conundrum and so like tied up if I try to post something. I'm like, I don't know what to do. What is and thank you, Ayu.
In my third book, Scarred, I talk about what I call emotional contract,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
So, emotional contract, I propose, is the antidote to self love, right? Because no matter how much you love yourself, like you said, take massage every week, meditate every day, right? When the structure does not support you, when the institutions do not support you, when your family does not support you, you cannot. Your self love can only go so much
mm-hmm,
without
mm-hmm.
this, what I call emotional contract. It's not a legal binding contract, kind of, you do this, I do that kind of thing. But, what are the agreements between you? It could be with your government, with your country, it could be with your state, it could be with your company, with the employers, it could be with your friends, it could also be with someone you live together with, because we get into relationship, personal relationship, romantic relationship, sometimes not talking about how are you going to support me, how am I going to support you, how are we going to support each other, what is the sort of support system that we can establish, right, as an agreement, so that we know how to be for each other, with each other, right, as a collective, right, prior
Yes.
to getting into that relationship, with work, with whatever.
I'm seeing the contrast between emotional contracts, which is very different from like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? Which is more a phase we've moved into culturally. Like, if it's meant to be, it's up to you. If you're failing, you didn't try hard enough or you weren't strong enough. So, say a little more about, maybe an example or how you think about that and how that can actually help us move into a different space from this very hyper individualized neoliberal.
Absolutely. I'm just going to take one example
Yeah.
from my own life, which is my back pain. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if you have any back pain, but I do. So, back pain is a feminist issue, and one that we can look from emotional contract versus self love. Self love is about maybe getting massages and all that kind of stuff that we talked about earlier, right? Emotional contract is looking at first the condition that creates that back pain. So, for example, some people actually, stand. Some people actually have to do certain things, right? That require them to do physical activities that create that back pain to begin with, right? And so, looking at like the structure, and then if they know, well, this kind of job actually creates my back pain. Can I then get another job? Right? Like, where is that support from the government, from the state, from the community, from the culture, whatever it is that would allow you to get another job? That's even just one. And in my book, I talk about healthcare. Ooh, touchy subjects, right? What about the healthcare in this country? Talking about the United States. You have to have a job. If you don't have a job, then you have to fall below certain limits or this or that, like to get certain support that you, again, may not qualify because of other situations. In other words, we don't have that national sort of healthcare like in other countries, is, where I'm getting at. Is our mental health is also part of that, because, I also talk about in the book that there are countries that have this national healthcare, amazing physical healthcare, but their mental health care is sort of lagging behind. That's what I mean by emotional contract. Again, not an actual sort of like contract. I agree to do this, and I promise to make you happy. Because again, going back to neoliberalism and what you're saying about what is the danger, the ideology, the political economy ideology of neoliberalism is that a good person is a happy person. And this is so dangerous, right? And so emotional contract is not about You have to be happy all the time. I'm going to make you happy all the time, because wow, that sounds like a regime right there. Because that is exactly the opposite of what I said earlier about, if I feel sad, if someone just died, is there a bereavement leave? I just want to know that there is the support system, that emotional contract to know. Because when you are lying there with cancer, worrying about, can I pay this medical bill? Because I don't know if the insurance will cover that one. I think it will cover that one. Are you going to get better when you keep thinking about the medical bills, right? Are you going to get better when you don't know who's going to take you to the next, appointment, to the next chemo, to the next whatever? So
Yeah.
that's where institutional support comes from, which is, it's not about avoiding the pain. It's not about pushing the pain away. It's not about promising you'll never, ever feel pain in your life. It's about getting that there is this support, collective institutional support, when you need that.
Yeah. I really hear you speaking about the conditions and conditions of care or lack thereof and the impact of that. And what I what I love what you do, Ayu, is you talk about how the the neoliberal gaze is like a distraction from seeing these bigger topics, these bigger things that may need to move and change to have conditions for people to flourish, right? Maybe it's a good place to talk about docile versus defiant perception. So, this is from your most recent book, Scarred. In the book, you describe your experience at a yoga retreat and how you emerged with certain, messages or takeaways like, I need to take up space and be loud. When triggered, we first need to unhook, don't take the emotional bait. And these things that at face value, they're good, right? Like, I'm not going to tell you, oh no, don't believe that, right? There's nothing wrong with the takeaways you had, and yet when you reflected, you said, I see that these are very neoliberal. This is, and this is a quote from the book. So you said, as an arrogant perceiver, we focus our stories mostly on the harmful behavior of the other as a result of their choices or character flaws, rather than the structure that enables the behavior. We also feel righteous in our pain and are invested more in our pain than in bringing down the dominant ideology. But it's like what you're saying is that there's a way that this conceptualization of pain, of, what I need to do about my pain, actually can double it down. It can keep me focused on it. It can keep me in a certain logic. And it can actually distract me from, for example, seeing we need different emotional contracts. We need to change our conditions of care to actually live well together, right? Where do you want to take it, Ayu?
Yeah. Oh, wow. And thank you for taking that quote.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect place to start. And again, this goes back to the first question that you had about the relationship, because in that chapter in particular about the docile versus defiant perception, I did talk about my father, and it was. I always sort of like, blame him, but as a person, right, that he was the problem, right? Without being able to look at, he was the product of his culture. Not to forgive, or not to say that, that it's okay, right? It is only to shift that perception, right? Because arrogant perception is all about, first of all, like, I'm in the right and you're in the wrong, right? And so we're really invested in how you wrong me because you're wrong, you as a person. And so rather than that, I want to look at what I call docile perception. And so docile perception, I take this sort of like notion or concept, sort of building on Michel Foucault's idea of docile bodies. We are trained in terms of, how, when do we walk, when do we talk, when do we eat, and how our bodies should be shaped. And a lot of feminist scholars who look at gender, they talk about how women's bodies are different in terms of how they move, how they walk, how they talk, the bodily sort of like movement, where the body can be, how the body dress, and all of that, as because we are being disciplined to do that. And being disciplined means if you are a woman and you wear this kind of outfit, I'm going to reward you. What are these rewards? Sometimes you get a better job. Sometimes you get compliments, which is very, simple. And if you don't do all these things, there are punishments, right? Well, if you're a woman and you act like that, oh, you can be ostracized. You may not have partners. You may not get jobs. So there are punishments and there are rewards. And this is how you get discipline in terms of your bodies, right? So the way that we sit for women, usually with our legs together, those kind of things, those are an example of docile bodies, meaning that we are taught, we are being disciplined to put our legs together versus like men, they may like spread their legs and all that kind of stuff. And this is just talking about two genders. If you talk about different genders, whoa, right? Like you're not even one of the two genders. Where are you? Like, like everything become chaotic. So you are not being disciplined. But that's bodies. Now, after going to so many retreats and all that kind of stuff, I began to think, wow, how we perceive is also being taught and disciplined, right? When someone says to us, oh, don't be negative, just think positively. So even positive thinking is an example of docile perception because we are taught, we are trained, we're being disciplined. This is how you're supposed to think, or this is how you're supposed to perceive. This is therefore how you're supposed to feel when something happens to you, right? And so that's the docile part of the perception, right? That you are being punished if you're not positive. Wow, that's so negative. And another example of like docile perception that I still sometimes subscribe to is perfectionism, right? Like I would be thinking, oh, I don't want to send my book yet because it's not perfect. And then I'm thinking, who taught me how to perceive this way? That I need to be perfect, that my book needs to be perfect, right? Like in graduate school, what we do is we read all this foundational sort of scholarship and we rip them apart. So even these brilliant books, right, is not quote unquote perfect. But where did I learn to perceive that way? How did I learn to perceive myself in that way? So that's the docile perception. And sometimes, and a lot of the times, they bring us more pain. I'm offering this concept of like defiant perception, right? So when we think of something in our head and that thought is hurtful, then I want to ask, who taught me, right? Where did I learn to think or to perceive that way, right? Again, it's not about blaming, oh, again, my mom taught me. No, no, that's not the point. The point is we learned this from somewhere, right? And trust me, if it is only your mother that teaches you that, it's not gonna congeal in that sort of like self-perception, because it has to be like maybe your mom and your friend, maybe your mom and your media, maybe it's social media. You know what I mean? Like not one person without, again, the support, the culture, the collective will have that impact on a person, on another person. Right. And so I'm going to give you just this one example because this may relate to a lot of people. And this relates to me. And sometimes I feel this way, is again related to my first book about beauty. Right. When we look at ourselves in the mirror and we say, oh, I don't look good today. Right. And I feel like, oh, whatever. Like you just feel off because you look at the mirror and you don't feel like, you don't look like one of the supermodels, and you feel like, So when you look at yourself in the mirror and you see something that your culture tells you is bad, it could be dark skin, which is like what my first book talks about, the skin, and then you feel bad about it. That right there, right, is already docile perception. Who teaches you to perceive that dark skin is bad? Who teaches you to perceive that when you gain weight is bad? That is docile perception. We feel bad, because of these sort of like perception that are actually harmful, but they support certain ideologies, right? And then we have to really catch that, right, that docile perception, and then have that defined perception again, not to say, oh, I am beautiful no matter what you say, right? Because that's neoliberalism, right? It's just sort of like, again, positive thinking. It's just switching that. What I invite people to do when they look at themselves in the mirror is then to identify that culture, the ideology, the collective. Don't blame the person. It's not about looking at the person, but again, looking at the culture that teaches you how to perceive in a certain way and defy that, right? Defy the culture, defy the ideology, defy the beauty standard, right? Rather than focusing on that guy, my father, my, like this person, whoever that person is, I can look at the culture, the structure, the ideology. That's what I criticize, not the person itself, right? And so that's the sort of like shift from the docile perception to defined perception. We have to undiscipline ourselves. We have to unlearn, not just for us, but also for the structure, for the collective.
Pain Generation is the one about social media. And it's called Pain Generation, Social Media, Feminist Activism, and the Neoliberal Selfie. You talk about vigilant eco-love, but you say to be vigilant is thus to refuse to play the neoliberal game of feeling the need to fix the pain. Rather than seeing a person as damaged, the vigilant eco-love standpoint sees the entire ecosystem as not working and therefore in need of transformation because everything is interconnected. I loved reading this. Maybe you can just speak to that for a moment.
The idea is that the government wants you to be vigilant within our community and to report what is going on in our community, right, back to the government or the state so that they can then kind of stop or arrest like these people, right? And so I actually want to take that notion of being vigilant and twist it, turn it on its head in some way so that it's not about policing our own community, right? But to always be vigilant in our love, So when we love someone, we often hear you want to unconditionally love that person. And what I wrote in my book is that unconditional love is good for movies, it's good for cards, it's good for, all of that, but it's not good for like social justice. It's not even good for our relationship, right? If you abuse me and I can unconditionally love you, like that's not good. That's not good for anybody in this relationship, right? So I want us to be vigilant to those who we love, who we admire, so that there is space, right, to allow that person to maybe rise up in terms of their behavior to be better than what this is, right? So when someone did something that is misogynist, that is racist, that is whatever, and even though they are our leaders, we need to have a space to let them know, and let them know not in the way of like, social media, because that book is about social media, and the sort of like call out, because a lot of the time I'll also see the tone of this calling out from like the arrogant perceiver, right? That I'm right, you are wrong, I'm calling you out because I know better. And when we do that to each other, then there is no space for anybody to do anything. I don't know about you, but I have made a lot of mistakes in my life. I'm not even going to say one or two, a lot of mistakes in my life, right? Because then it doesn't allow for any mistakes to be made And so it's just going to be about, then you cancel the person rather than the culture. So within this sort of like eco love, and I guess again, that was, like you said, that was my second book. I was trying to get at that emotional contract, right? So I really want to move away from that self-love because I find that so problematic. So in my second book, that was my attempt to move away from self-love. Rather than looking at the self, we look at the ecosystem, right? Again, looking at the structure and continue to be vigilant even as we are part of that culture. The most important part of the vigilant eco love is to understand that the self is part of that ecology, right?
Right.
The I is always in the context. So when you brought up like that writing that I had in my retreat about I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, right? So yeah, it's about the I. The I will always be there, right? But how can we always put that I in the context? This is kind of like a funny things that I saw on Instagram Reels the other day, which is, oh, you want to know how we influencers can afford or make money? Being invited to all these fancy things, whatever. And then she said, it's being rich. So I love that. I love that because it is funny, but it is also providing that context, the I in the context. How can this person like do all of that? Yeah, maybe it's not always that way. Obviously some influencers actually do become like a rising star from nothing. So I don't want to kind of dismiss that either. Where is the I in the context? Yes, you can do this, but what happened? What are some of the mentors, the support system, whatever, that allow you to not work 9 to 5 job anymore and then become this multi-millionaire from investing from whatever, right? So what is the context? That's where I wanted us to go with that vigilant eco love.
Yes. The I in the context. And when we miss the context, um, we can get into very damaging ideology, really, where people start thinking, well, I'm not rich because I'm not doing XYZ, right? If you're rich, you must be wonderful and you must, just have life all figured out. And we're missing that bigger picture. I have a few last questions that I want to pose. What is one practical thing you do day to day that you see making a difference in our modern or neoliberal predicament that we're in?
In my third book, Scarred, I talk
Yeah.
about this concept called feminist enchantment. And I go by this every single day, except for the days that I can't do it anymore. I'm just not going to do it. That's fine. So the idea of feminist enchantment is, well, first of all, this being enchanted, meaning that you are out there doing something, and then for a moment, it could be a split second, it could be whatever, but it takes you away from this world to another world that is like, again, enchanted, right? You look at beautiful painting and you're like, wow. You taste certain food and you're like, wow, what is in this thing? Like, I want 100 kilograms of this thing, right? So you're being enchanted. Allows you, again, because the third book is about pain, allow you to take yourself from this painful world or whatnot to, like, be in that other world, just for a second, or moments. I talk about moments, but this is not just any kind of enchantment, or any kinds of like, oh, I just want to forget, I just want to escape. No, this is feminist. How is it feminist? First of all, a lot of us who are out there doing sort of like, works related to social justice or whatnot, we do feel the burnout, right? And so when you feel burnout, you can't do this anymore, then obviously you can't do this work anymore. That's it, right? So we need to, feel enchanted so that we can go back, right?
Mm.
And do all of these things that would allow us to, change the culture. So we want to be enchanted, but it's for the social justice kind of goal, right? And in the book, I talk more about, what it means to forget, what it means to, be playful all the time and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to dwell on that too much today. And actually, that is an invitation to have that conversation with me. And again, ask your library, right? If you want to read this book, ask your library to buy it, right? So that not only that you can read it, maybe others can read it. So no, I'm not saying that you should buy it. If you only have $20 extra this month, no, I don't need you to like spend that money on my book. You can literally ask the library to buy that book, but it is an invitation. The idea of feminist enchantment is also about a relationship with your environment. It's not just about, you yourself, but how are you going to engage? How are you going to live within this environment where you are? And therefore, what are some of the things that is there that could create that kind of like enchanted moments? So that's my one thing.
What I hear you saying, Ayu, is enchantment and these moments of delight and pleasure and awe in the world are totally one with social justice. This is all an expression of something that's possible for us. And I think that's so beautiful. And that you're inviting people to ask your library for it. Make it available in your communities so everyone can be reading about your journeys around the world and all that you learned and brought into your theory and your teaching. And what you're sharing with us. So, a couple more questions. Okay. So, one thing I'm doing with this podcast is I'm asking a pay it forward question. So, in a moment, I want to get yours. But I asked someone else, a very cool friend and colleague of mine, Janelle, what would you ask a person who has a really cutting edge perspective on the modern world? And she asked, what is the plot for you? Like, what's the story behind what you're doing? What's driving your work? What's kind of the plot of it? What would you say, Ayu?
Again, going back to your first question about what is that relationship that shaped my life, because I feel that that's what this question is also about. What is the
Yeah.
plot for you? So for me, a lot, again, it happens with the culture. I remember being like maybe 7 years old, like maybe second grade, things like that. I literally have like notebooks and I start writing with my hands. Sometimes it's poetry, sometimes it's just like stories. I would just write. And then after my sister went to junior high, she has this typewriter again. I date myself in terms of like all these things that we had growing up. And then when she's not using it, I start typing with like literally like this. This is why I'm doing this, like tick, 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 and so I became sort of like a writer in that way because of I see like what's going on in my life with the patriarchal Japanese culture that we talked about. Obviously, when I was a child, it wasn't about patriarchy and stuff like that. That language was not even available
Mm-hmm.
for me. But I like to tell stories again, just like type, 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 type. And I became a published author when I was 17 years old. It was short fiction, so it was like all of them were short stories. And here I am now, still writing, so many decades later. But now, because of that, culture, the patriarchal culture that shaped me in terms of the what do I focus on, what research am I focusing on? That's what drives me in terms of like the content of what I write.
Yes, like seeing that context and understanding it and being able to write about it. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. What is one question you would ask a person who has a cutting edge perspective on the modern world? What would you ask?
Okay, I'm going to ask this because I'm really curious about the answer, which is what was your life's biggest fear
Mm.
and how did you overcome it? I always want to know like how people overcome their fear because we are living in a, fear, kind of, culture in some ways or context right now that we want to you hear. I want to hear that story. I want to learn
I
about
love that question. I
fear.
can't wait to ask it. That's great. What is a group or cause that more people should know about?
I think this question really the assumption is pointing at a group that is not well known yet, right? And then I, again, if I'm allowed to kind of like twist that question, to focus on rather than the group out there, I want to invite the viewers or the listeners to think about one thing that they feel passionate about, what drives them, right? So that the first thing is like just that kind of like topic, like something that they feel passionate about. And second, within that topic that they feel passionate about, I want to invite them to focus on something that within that thing, it could be photography, it could be whatever, but that thinks about the well-being of all, again, not just the person, not just, but like that, right? And the third thing that is the most important is within your ecology or community. So this is because I was thinking about, like, there is this group in Indonesia that focuses on providing support for mothers who are about to give birth, like who don't have access, and I was like, you know what, how about just focusing on within your own ecology and community, your if you have children, their schools maybe and stuff like that. And this was driven by the fact that over a decade ago, I think this was, I didn't realize that one of my own cousins was malnourished. Like they didn't have money, like, to eat, right? And so I was like, there I was at the time, thinking about the world, this and that. And then there are people in my own community, in my own ecology, who are not taken care of. Right. And so this is why the invitation, if that's allowed, is to focus or just look at the community. Again, this is a way to connect, right? Make friends between worlds. I'm not saying that the community has to be your neighbors. It would be great though, like if it could be like somewhere where you can actually, be a part of, like your own school, your kids' school, like your own family and stuff like that. I
Yeah.
think
Well, and I love that you're bringing this in because we've talked about the structural, the systemic, right? The whole ecology of care, for example, that may need to shift in some way. And what you're saying is, and we can come right into our here and now, our neighbors. We've gotten away from knowing the person next to me. And what could we do here? What does care look like here? It's like we've talked about, like, kind of the big overarching issues, and there's this coming into our local regional community and seeing what we can do and know there.
that concept of the self as part of the
Yeah.
ecosystem, or the I in the context, is a great like concept to like be understood. Like, it's something that I grasp with my mind, but when you can actually feel that, like, what does
Yes.
it really mean that this self, that me, is really part of this community, really part of this, that I
Yeah.
cannot be separated from this, that this is this and this is that, like it's
Yes.
part of that. When you can actually click that as really feeling that, experiencing that, then it's like, wow, right? That harm that harms those people is also harming me, and what's happening to me is also hurting others, right? And so like it's that kind of really getting and having that experience in your own body. And when that clicks, again, you cannot unsee that.
And it's fine for people to post selfies and stuff. We're not, but it's that can take us out of the neoliberal selfie gaze, right? Where we're projecting images and looking at other people's projected images and come into our bodies, into our communities, into what's possible here. Yeah, I love that you brought that in.
Because again, that we need a community, we need the collective, we need, a lot of people doing their own things. And that's the other thing too, that I mentioned in my book. My second book is that sometimes we say, oh, this is what activism looks like, and I don't have the privilege, the effort, the energy to do that kind of activism. What does that look like? And that's what I ask my students. Activism could look like reading your 2-year old things about how we can be kind to another person, how we can create that connection, how, we can achieve social justice, maybe not in that big words, right? But there are these days children's books that focus on that focus on ending racism, that focus on ending certain kind of like beauty standard and stuff like that. So that's what that's what activism look like for you right now. And that's okay. That is your community right now. That's what activism looks like. Do what we can in what you do, in whatever topic, theme, cause that really bring that passion. Because feminist enchantment, this I'm gonna end with this, I think, is that this feminist enchantment, one of the things is about bringing the erotic in our life, in our body. And the erotic here is not about like erotica or like sex. It could definitely be that, right? But the erotic here is about that life force. And I'm quoting from Audre Lorde here, obviously. The life force, meaning that, like when you feel in your erotic body, you actually feel good. You like walk, you just like, wow, this is amazing. You have that kind of like passion. Then you dare to say something. Then you dare to say something to like challenge someone, or just like, just saying what you think, right? Whether it challenges somebody or not. Because right now we are living in era, myself included, that we are disconnected, not only with our emotions, but also with our body, right? Sometimes I look at Instagram posting and say, oh, I want to eat that. But is that what you really, really want to eat right now? Or because that's like so pretty, right? So what is happening in our body? What are we really feeling? Because when we have to work 9 to 5, sometimes we do have to like numb our feelings so that we don't feel things. But when you compound all those numbness throughout years and decades, you have lost that sort of sensation or the ability to ask yourself, like, what is it that you want? So a lot of these advice for people to listen to your intuition. I say, wait a minute. Have you listened to your intuition for the past at least a year, a month, or whatever before you make this life-changing decision? Because we don't even know how to listen to our intuition. We don't even know how to get into, or that intuition in our body, right? So we want to practice, and through feminist enchantment, when we practice that daily, day in and day out, we become connected to ourselves, be our erotic self. Then that's when the life force, the whole thing, the creativity, ideas, whatever, you can listen to your body then. But before that, we need to practice. This is advice to myself too, most likely.
I am taking it in and feel so resonant with what you're saying. There's something about humans reconnecting, rediscovering, unearthing the true life force that is essential to what we are, that we have become so distracted and disconnected from. It's causing so much pain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I love that you brought in that way of saying it. What is the best way for people to connect with your work? What would you say?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's DR, short for doctor, and then Saraswati, which is my last name, SARASWATI.com. So drsaraswati.com. And on there's also email and, all of that. I do not have a currently public social media right now, which when I don't know. I probably will go back to that, in the future. But right now, I do not. So email or my website is where I have it. But
Wonderful. And I'll put that in the show notes so people can click through. Wonderful. Well, I feel hope. Very much hope that this is the first of many conversations.
Me too. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. This is so much fun.
It was fun, wasn't it? And, I feel like I wanted to get into embodiment. We only started to touch on it towards the end. And so more conversations to come.
Yes.
Thank you for what you brought here today, the way you show up, your wisdom, all of your research and studies and ways of looking at the world that you've brought here and you've brought in your books. The two I have on my desk right now are Pain Generation and Scarred.
Wow.
We will see you again soon. Thank you for listening, friends. Please subscribe and like the podcast, and please engage with the community so we can make this a conversation. Our theme music is Building Without Materials by Aaron Vorio Jackson from his album Sandbox. Our cover art is by Yvonne Blanco. I am your host, Christina Congleton. Let's stay curious, let's stay discerning, and let's stay as friendly as we can. Take care, everyone.